Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and today, power, wealth, legacy, the high stakes game of control with the real, it's my moniker for him, the real family office fixer, Daniel Zamora. History does not mark the end of power, only its transformation. I believe, as Daniel noted in one of his incredible LinkedIn posts, crowns change, empires fracture, but dominion endures for those who are prepared to claim it. And the same is, of course, true for families. I've been stating most wealth holders believe their structures will endure. Well, most of you are wrong. Wealth, influence, and legacy do not survive by standing still. They last because they are preserved, protected, and positioned for what comes next. Some inherit riches, some inherit power. Few inherit the wisdom to hold both. It's been a long time since I've been looking to have an incredible guest like Daniel on. And really, he's not someone to do these kind of things very often, or if really not at all. I'm very fortunate to call him a friend, a colleague, even a mentor, and someone that I learned from, and happy to share, hopefully, some good questions on my part and insights from Daniel that I think many of you are going to greatly benefit from for a lot of the reasons that I noted. A little bit of context. Daniel has advised on, such things as hostile takeovers, political crisis, high profile, and I do mean high profile, family disputes, capital strategies that shape industries. His expertise really lies in the unseen, where power shifts quietly, and the consequences, and this could be the hard part, are always permanent. Daniel, it's a great pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Angelo. We've had some great conversations throughout our career here, and it's a pleasure to finally be with you today.
Well, I'm fortunate to be in the community for multiple decades and do know incredible people. But I would say once a year, and maybe you were it last year, I come across someone that I didn't really know and I get to know, and I'm way the better for it. And I do have some kind of collabs and things that we'll be doing, actually beginning 30 days from today. So it's going to be a little bit of a hook for the audience to stay with us a little bit. This will be relatively long form, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Your LinkedIn post, by the way, and not just because you were kind enough to quote me 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I love the one, I think it's T.S. Eliot. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. And I felt it very intriguing to how complex the world is now. And I tell families, I think the part that you quoted me was when I stated family offices are built for a world that effectively no longer exists. It's different geopolitically, economically, and the rise of AI is more than what it looks on the surface. And that's the problem with too many on the surface. It's societal and game-changing and effectively happening before our very eyes. So again, thank you for being on. And I think the first question, and a bit of a complex one, you've been in rooms where real power moves happen. What's the biggest misconception that ultra-wealthy people have about control?
It's a great question. We're starting off here strong here. I think the biggest misconception that the ultra high net worth have as it relates to control is that they have control. More times than not, the ultra high net worth families, at least in my experience that I'm working with, are living under an illusion of control. This illusion is predicated in part on their golden cage of privilege, in part because of the titles that they carry, the weight that they carry when they walk in a room. And that can give someone a false sense of control. And when chaos erupts you quickly see how little control that you really have. And really what's running underneath the surface of most of these families is a hidden battle that they don't see. So we know that families throughout history are constantly fighting. They're typically fighting two battles. There'll be a battle that will be internal and private, whether those are mental health issues, substance abuse, financial challenges, even financial windfalls, as I think is one of the prerequisites to a large-scale crisis. When an individual realizes that they no longer have control, it can be a very difficult truth to accept. I think that most of us live in a world in which we have our truth and there is the truth. Part of my job, Angelo, and you know this, is I'm in the business of difficult conversations. I am the anti-yes man when I'm coming into those rooms. We have gone through all of the traditional channels at that point. So when I come in and have to tell someone, you've lost complete control of this situation, and much like you talked about with the quote there, this is how the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. It's the whimpering that is happening for years or decades that people are missing. And when the bang finally does come, and invariably there will be something that sets off the triggering point to where an individual recognizes that they don't have any control. It's very difficult for people who have a lot of resources. Most of the people that I work with have full teams around them. They have their wealth managers, their family office, they have lawyers, accountants, economists, life coaches, all of those things. But when they can't help, they don't really know where to turn. And one of the biggest challenges is that when we reach our own level of incompetence, that can be a very dangerous place and a scary place, especially for a father, a mother, a grandparent who is responsible for everyone that is beneath them. So when they lose control and they realize it and everyone realizes it, it's chaos.
I mean, that reminds me of both of us dabble a little bit in history, philosophy. And I said earlier, most wealth holders think their structures will endure. Well, to some degree, it's a matter of timeline. I could assure you, if you give me an endless timeline, they will not. I don't care who you are. So you talk a little bit about Rome. I talk a little bit about the French Revolution. And if you don't mind, if you could weave a story or from your perspective around that, how people of wealth, and I think that first question queued it up, think that it is what it will always be, that I'm going to control through dynastic trust. I'm going to control through the grave. I'm raising my children right. They're going to the right schools. They know what to do. And everything is going to be fine. It's going to be different for me than it is for the majority of families that after generations, their wealth dissipates. Why do people feel that way?
Yeah. So I think in part, the reason why people get there, and you talked about the French Revolution, right? So let's talk about Bonaparte just for a second. And I know this isn't a history lesson here, but Bonaparte didn't lose because he lacked brilliance or planning. He was known for rigid planning, and also was very flexible on the execution of that, which really is a great strategy to have when you go into any battle. You need to be prepared, but you have to be flexible when the ball moves, to move with it, to be in control of that. And so when you look at Napoleon, he didn't lose because he lacked brilliance. He lost because he was fighting too many wars. When you're fighting too many wars, you can't keep your eye on the prize. And so if you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, you're an elected official, a tech titan, head of a family office, the pressures are extreme. The scrutiny is there. We see it every day. Someone getting canceled or being exposed in the media. Those are high-level pressures. And so you're fighting all of these battles publicly, internally, and then even within yourself. I mean, we can't discount the fact that each one of us also has our own problems, right? I can't speak for you, but I've certainly had problems in my life and had to deal with them and overcome them. But if you're fighting too many battles, you can't focus on what matters the most. Most of my practice has been surrounded by families. And so when I see a family who is, I'll give you an example. Let's say a young adult is struggling with substance abuse. It's been a problem for several years. And at this point, I've been referred to them through their wealth advisor, who has, sent them to all the best treatment centers in the country and, outside of the US as well. And then I'll go and meet with the family, meet with the mother, the father, and then I will meet with the person that's impacted. And I'll always ask the parents the same thing. What are you willing to do for your child to save them? Because at this point, they're highly desperate. And they will almost always say the same thing. There's nothing I wouldn't do for my child. And it's surprising when you then call them on that and say, well, I think what your child needs is some time with one of their parents. They have been at boarding schools their whole life. Every time something happened, you came in and cleaned it up and then sent them away again. What we have here is an emotional disconnection. Would either one of you be willing to take a sabbatical from work, retire? None of the people that I'm working with are without the resources to do that. I understand it's more complicated than that, but at the same time, we're talking about life and death matters. And so when you ask someone, what are you willing to do? And they say, I'm willing to do anything. And then you simply say, well, are you willing to lose a paycheck for 6 months to save your child's life? And they won't do that. That's their decision. And I don't have a position on that because that's not my job to have a position. My job is to help people understand their options so that they can make informed decisions about what's best for their family. So I think it's important for people to really understand where their boundaries are, why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of people talk about now about wealth having a purpose, and I couldn't agree more. If your wealth is to create a legacy, a dynastic legacy, something that would be passed on for generations, something that you and I both know is incredibly difficult to do. Third generation is not the exception anymore. It is the rule. And so when you present opportunities for change, transformative change to people, but it conflicts with what their real purpose is for wealth, you can understand why a young child, a teenager, or even someone in their 40s and 50s who have lived in that, they understand the priorities of their parents. And typically they do not feel as though they are a priority.
I mentioned your writing about Rome falling and some of the things I've discussed about the French and Russian Revolution, about how, again, most family offices are built for a world that no longer exists. That doesn't mean they won't be functional, that you won't be okay the next year or two. It just means you're not going to be optimized, and you're likely not going to have continuity in the family for a variety of reasons. But I want to stay on the tone. Some would say a little bit negative. We'll get a little more smiley and happy relatively shortly. But just look at the world that we're in. I was in Florida in December, and I heard the news that would become Luigi Mangione and him shooting the United Healthcare CEO, executive, and then people somewhat cheering him on, as opposed to looking at them and wanting to slap them on top of the head. I actually took a little bit of a step back and try to put myself in their shoes. It's their perspective about what's wrong in society today. Don't get me wrong. I still want to slap them on the side of the head, and hopefully Mangione goes to jail for the rest of his life, which is what he deserves. I look at the LA fires a couple of weeks later and people cheering on the fires in the Pacific Palisades. And this is what happens among the haves and have-nots. This is what happened to a degree leading into even the Russian Revolution. And effectively, at the end of the day, during some of the upheaval that we're talking about, the rich were, and I'm trying to use a nice word here, effectively were wiped out, weren't rich any longer. There's dynamics of bifurcation happening in society that is sad, a little sickening. And for families and their offices to ignore this and not be familiar with it, and for an executive to only be focused on investing or accounting, which I know may be the definition of their job,
Sure.
I find very frustrating. People like me and you like to think of things a little bit deeper, and maybe we think we're trying to play 4D chess. Where's the disconnection here?
I think a lot of the disconnection comes again from this sense of that couldn't happen to me, and which I don't think is specific just to people in position of power. If you talk to anyone who has suffered a major tragedy, irrespective of financial resources, they will say, I just never thought that that could happen to me. When you are in a position such as the deceased, you have a lot of power. And I think sometimes you take for granted that we still live in a very dangerous world. There are bad actors out there. There are other forces that are at play that can really impact what's going on in the world. And so I think that comes down to two things. Number one, I think organizations have an obligation to think more comprehensively about their C-suite and those that are supporting them, especially because of the duties they have to shareholders. On top of that, I think that people need to be a little bit more mindful of where they're at, what they're doing, how they're moving. It was surprising to see that, something like that could happen to him. Not surprising in the sense that someone was murdered for seemingly no apparent reason, but more so that could happen to him. As you can imagine, there's been a major uptick in calls regarding security and looking for security detail. We've been fielding them. Some people want presence. Some people want to be hiding in plain sight where security is not really there. But I also think people want to live normal lives. When you talk to celebrities, what is one of their biggest gripes as they're recognizing their privilege is they can't go to the mall anymore. They can't go to a Starbucks and just get a coffee because they will be mobbed. There are a lot of people out here that they're not living in safe environments. And what I mean by that is safe within their mind. We have a lot of people out here that are dealing with mental health illnesses, substance abuse. And when that manifests in a real way and the actions come forward into the real world, the consequences are permanent, as we saw there. So I think it's in part the individual wanting to still live their life. I think there's a part that's arrogance and also just a part of why would that happen to me? Just kind of this disbelief that anything so tragic would befall someone like that.
Family offices were originally designed for capital preservation, long-term growth, multi-generational continuity in a relatively stable economic and political landscape. That world no longer exists. So I now turn my attention to what I define as gatekeepers, which can be the family office, and perhaps a little bit of a negative take. Commonly, the greatest fear of gatekeepers is to no longer be of value to those that they serve. The approach is understandable. If I don't understand the real world, then keep the real world from the ones that I serve. The gatekeepers will let the world, too often, burn to the ground to give up, or before they give up their cherished positions. How do we put ourselves in an understanding of why they may feel that way, but why, again, staying static when the world is changing rapidly is not going to work in the way the world, quote unquote, now works? How do we address that issue?
Yeah. So I'll start with the second part of your question and go into the first. You look at the last 10 years, we're seeing about the same year-over-year growth as it relates to adding more millionaires in the US, right? About 1.4, 1.3, depending on the year. So I think we've talked about how family offices are underestimating what heirs are doing, despite the data that north of 50%, upwards of 70% of second gen are going to take their money elsewhere. I think they have a bit of a legacy mindset. I also think that in part, the problem is that I personally don't believe that family offices should be running next gen, should be working directly with next gen. That's not to say that they can't. I know some very big banks that do a good job at it. But you have to separate who does what, and kind of going into your first question, right? So I said earlier, if you cannot admit when you've reached your own level of incompetence, and that's no shot on you. I don't know financial terms the way that a CFA does. I don't manage money. I don't move it around. I step out of that equation when that conversation comes up, despite the fact that I've been in those conversations. I've looked at those contracts. I've negotiated them, but I still know where my value is. I think that the family office space would do wonders if they were less worried about losing clients and losing the control. What are most family office set up with? They're set up with financial people who think one particular way, right? And they should. That's what they're good at. But when most family offices I engage with say, Daniel, 50% of our clients are going through these problems. And I said, well, if you need any help, just let me know. They don't want it. They don't want it, I think, in part because maybe it's because I'm an attorney and they think I'm there to play gotcha. And I've never done any legal work with a family office, and I don't have any plans on doing that. I think that they're afraid that they will lose the golden goose, and they're just holding on to it as long as they can. I think thirdly, if a family office is going to engage with next gen, they have to engage with next gen in the same way that they engage with the first generation, right? So you have your individual who has the money, the resources, set the office up, et cetera, and they basically dictate what this is going to be about, their wishes, their desires. But there's other things that are happening, right? So they're calling and saying, oh, my son is doing X. My daughter had done this. My wife is doing this. My husband can't stop doing whatever it is. The advisors are hearing that. They're building their own perceptions of the people that they are, obligated to serve and why they're there. But they're doing it from the first generation's perspective, which is, of course, we want that perspective because they know their family better than anyone else. But if you're not spending the same time with the second generation, the third generation, because, next gen can be basically born to, 60 years old at this point. People are living a lot longer.
Indeed.
So, some of these wealth managers are, 20 years my senior and even older, doing a great job. And we know that when we get older, we're less worried about things. It's more casual. We'll be fine. Everything's going to be okay. We'll get through it. It's just another problem we're dealing with. So family offices could, if they were comfortable to be more inclusive, and I use that word not in the way that it's typically used politically, but just inclusive as it relates to, they can't solve all of these problems. And if they could, they wouldn't be frantically going after next gen over the last 2 years. You and I have probably a very similar curated LinkedIn page. And that's all I see is all these next gen advisors coming out of nowhere and everywhere. And everyone's talking about family governance plans and succession plans and constitutions. And you and I both engage with these types of people all the time, have great conversations with some and not so great with others. But it's always interesting to me. I would say, well, what was it like when you met with them? They're like, oh, we do everything virtual. So you've never sat with the client. Like, no, we do things virtual. That was their preference. Okay, great. How often are you doing that? Have you done a high impact assessment? Have you spent a month on the ground with them during difficult times, good times, bad times, just kind of, ordinary time as well? I don't think that people that go to Wharton for an MBA to then go work in private equity or in family offices, they're not getting a whole bunch of counseling, or how to counsel people. It's not part of the curriculum. At least with the law, there is a counselor at law aspect to what lawyers are doing. But, we're talking about family offices, but we can't not talk about lawyers as well, because lawyers are also part of the problem. They typically are the ones that will say no for almost no reason. I'll give you a great example. I was called into a family retreat by a son of Next Gen Air. And so we show up to this retreat, and I'm sure you're familiar with these retreats, and everyone's there, and there's this specialist there that's going to talk to everyone, et cetera. And I have a debriefing notebook going into it, so I know who everyone is. I have pictures of them and kind of who everyone is. And my job is to sit there and just observe and just to see what's going on, to try to see what other people aren't seeing. And we were having a great day. Everything was going well, and an attorney raised his hand and said something to the effect of, how do we measure the value of the services that they're bringing, and et cetera, et cetera. Not an unreasonable question, but kind of bizarre from an attorney's perspective. So I didn't get involved in that answer. Some people were answering it. The Next Gen looked at me, signaled to me to answer. And I said, I understand that you represent the family legally. Is that correct? He said, yes. I said, are they in any pending litigation right now? Are there any transactions that will be railroaded or compromised or optimized through this weekend retreat where we're just talking about family dynamics? And the attorney said no. And I said, then why are you here? Like, what are you doing here as an attorney? The family brought him there, but the family then was, why is our attorney here? What's he doing here? And it was obviously an uncomfortable situation. And I rounded it out by saying, listen, I'm happy to work with you, et cetera, but I don't really understand your question. You're trying to measure value of a service that's completely outside of the world in which you work. This isn't billable hours. This isn't retainer agreements or success fees. These are people's lives. And you have to remember that financial processes do not apply to individuals. Human processes apply there. And so when you take it one step further and you bring legal into it, whose job it is to protect, and I understood the basis of the question. But again, we're not talking large sums of money. It's not going to impact him in any way. He's billing a tremendous amount of money to be there all weekend, and there was really no point to be there. And so that's why I understand why family offices are doing what they're doing. I think it's because of AI and quantum computing and all the technological advancements that are coming. And I also think that people care too. But at the same time, I think people need to know their role and stay in it and really be good at what they do. Again, I try not to step into worlds where I don't understand what I'm doing. I could cause my client a disservice. I could impact their life in a profoundly negative way. Why would I do that? I would be much happier referring them, deferring out to someone else, or finding the appropriate person for them under the circumstances.
What's the single biggest failure that you see in modern families' governance, which effectively is how decisions are made?
Yeah.
Is it complexity of committees? Is it over-reliance on outdated, rather stodgy mission and vision statements, a family constitution, assuming they even have any of that at all?
Right. I think the biggest mistake that they all make is that you can put together the greatest governance plan, and I have my thoughts on what a governance plan should look like and how it is successful. But just like if you have a optimal seed that yields a great grow of whatever fruit or vegetable you're talking about, if you take that same seed and put it in soil it's not right to grow, it's not going to get any sun, it's not going to get the water, it doesn't have the nutrients there, then even the best seed will die in that dead soil. And I think that's what's happening with these family governance plans. I do believe that people are putting a ton of resources and time into trying to put them together, but you simply can't account for everything. You can't account for your child overdosing. You don't put that in your mind as you're raising your children, that this could potentially happen, or abduction, or an assault, a sexual assault, whatever it might be. Those things aren't there. So when a family goes to a family governance plan and tries to find the answers on their own to life's greatest challenges, the answers are simply not there. And so now they have this great constitution, but they have no answers. They really have no solutions. And that's what they're missing, are the solutions.
Yes, I have a little bit of something that I talk about with families. I am a believer in systems. I think systems, broadly speaking, are very important. But I think every time something goes wrong, you think it's a failure of a system, you either update or add new systems. And that sounds good on the surface, and that does have some value. The years go on, conditions change. No one could do anything without going through a process in the system, and the systems don't relate to the problem that may be different this time, and the people involved in it are different. Henceforth, too many systems become bureaucratic, something I personally despise, bureaucracy. And they cause people to, I don't know if I'd use the word not be free thinkers. They add to the fragility as opposed to the anti-fragility of either the person involved or the family office. Systems still make my big three. They're number three of the big three, by the way, in the family office, but they could absolutely be overdone. You said something relatively similar, just to some degree in a little bit of a different way, which maybe segues into my next point. It's a very vague, open-ended question. When does a family office go from being a wealth protector to a true power center?
Well, I think that starts almost at inception. Why are we creating the family office in the first place? So if you don't have purpose behind why you're doing it, someone else is already in control. You may feel in control, but you're really not, because you do need all of your players to play their part. When a family office is at its best, number one, they have a strong team, a strong proponent of talent. Number two, I would put systems in there as well, like you said. But without the human connection, the human element that can adjust and be dynamic as human relationships are, it's almost like trying to raise all of your kids the exact same way. And for those of us who have children, all of your children are different. And even where they fall in your family, they're going to get a different version of you. And so when a family office tries to have like kind of one plan for everyone, it fails to account the individuality of each person who is impacted by this. And so that one person who is not towing the line, the person who is out kind of doing their own thing, being independent, wanting some autonomy, they're typically shunned or looked down on because they are bucking up against the system. And that system was created by the person who has all of the control, which creates a dynamic where people have to mute their own individuality, what they want to do with their life, etc., or their purpose, for the benefit of the paycheck. Because a lot of these individuals have never had a real job. If you've grown up flying on private jets from the time you were a child, it's a great way to travel. what does your child aspire for? What do they ever have to aspire for? Not to say that private jet is the ultimate aspiration, but these children have so many blessings, so many privileges given to them. What ends up happening is that families lose sight of what made them successful in the first place. And I think a lot of that comes down to families have stopped playing offense. They're in a defensive posture or in a reactionary posture. And when you stop playing offense, others are playing offense around you, and you just don't see it. You don't recognize that it's coming. And so, the systems have to account for all of the dynamics within the family. Getting into governance is slightly different in the sense that governance is largely seen as a peacekeeping effort. I look at it slightly different. I believe that family governance is a war-ready mindset. I think for a war-ready governance plan to be there, you have to have, number one, clear lines of authority. There can be no weak hands on the controls. I also think that a good governance plan has a firewall, that the business operates separate from sentiment. And too often, families are combining everything together. And when you do that, you are now bringing in aspects of human behavior, resentment, all of the reasons why kids grow up and say they're upset with their parents, right? And a lot of them do. Recognizing heirs as individuals who could go on and do great things with the resources that they have and empowering them instead of saving them would be one step in the right direction to empower this next generation. It's something I'm floored that family offices aren't doing that more, just empowering these generations to get into the new digital assets, to get into cross-border transactions. You mentioned geopolitics a lot. We know that next gen is concerned about geopolitical maneuverability. Traditional family offices are a little, we're not too worried about that right now, which always strikes me as odd, because why bet on something when you can know, right? Like when you can get information and you have the resources to do that, why would you bet on an unsure thing? I mean, there's a reason why people go into Congress and they come out with more money. They're betting on sure bets there. And the fact that family offices aren't doing that is crazy. Something that's happened in my practice over the last couple of years is clients have been asking if they can come with me to different events. I go to the U.S. Senate every year for an intelligence forum. I've been invited around the world for similar opportunities. And recently people have started, in the last couple of years, have been saying, what would it take? Can I come? We're interested in that. We're thinking of another residency, another passport. We're thinking of moving our money over there. What do you think? I was like, well, let's just go. Let's go and check it out yourself. But they're not going as a bystander. They're going and meeting people that can help them make real strong decisions. So again, I have a contact now who's doing a lot of work in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I've never been there. I know a little bit about it. I've been invited there a few times. And just recently someone asked me if I have any connections there and they would like to start a business. I said, absolutely, and immediately connected him to that person because it's just something that I don't do.
The power of network is very real. In a world that is changing rapidly, your global connectivity effectively on multiple grids, and especially with your heirs, your rising generation, is going to be very important. The push forward to being built in a pre-AI geopolitical safety net and economic stability world and how that has already changed. It's going to be driven likely partially depending on the ages and the impetus of your rising generation for active change. People are very, very reluctant that have had some sort of success, especially if in the family office world. They want things to be as they are, because as they are has worked pretty well for them. Possibly even a rigged game. It is what it is. But that world, and we're seeing it play out and change now in front of our eyes, is changing very, very rapidly. It's a bit of an indirect transition. You hinted at it earlier, but it stays with the rising generation here. Some say an $84 trillion asset transfer. Some call it 116 trillion. It's a big number.
Absolutely.
And it's happening. But if I could push back just a little bit, and this is where it's going to get interesting. One, people are living longer. AI in the next 10 years is going to have a drastic impact on medicine, on biotech, on so many different things that are going to add to the longevity. So what's going to happen? You hinted at it. I could be the second gen in line ready to take over. I could be 60 years old, like me. What happens if that's pushed back 10 or 15 years? Also, people of success and power, they sometimes like to control from the grave. We're going to have dynastic generation skipping trust. I'm going to dictate certain terms because I know better, and that's the way it is. A wonderful opportunity for intra-family lawsuits. So the whole thing about a wealth transfer, but suppose it ends up being a wealth transfer that for some ultra-rich rising generations never really happens. Have you thought about that, Daniel?
I have, absolutely. And I think it is interesting. You know, we're living a lot longer, and on top of that, people are working a lot longer as well. You and I both know most people that have a windfall exit, you know, after about 6 to 9 months, depending on their age, they find themselves bored, without identity, lost during the day. And so they'll begin to focus on other aspects of their life. And I do think that that is where that really controlling from the grave comes from. I think it comes from a place of fear. And there are families that I know that even though the grandfather, the father is controlling everything, there needs to be control. The biggest fear of the wealth transition is, what are they going to do with it? And what are they going to do when they don't have it anymore? You're going to have a whole bunch of people that have never held down jobs for a long period of time, haven't had to struggle much the way that an ordinary individual would understand struggle and kind of the benefits of struggle and what comes from that. So as we live longer and work longer, I think you're going to find more and more litigation, as you said. We saw it with, you know, the Murdoch family. I think that was when that happened, I think everyone realized if the Murdochs can't control their trust, you know, that's going to be tough. You know, it's a modern day empire. So it's going to be an interesting time for sure.
Now, that brings up the fact that most rising gens appear to have an interest that you hinted at earlier in changing their advisors, and that absolutely applies into the single family office as well. I have somewhat of a game plan, depending on the quality of the SFO and how much they want to get better, to help address those issues. But again, a lot of people just, I don't know, they refuse to listen is not quite the words I'm looking for, but effectively the impact of that is still very profound. So I'm going to talk a little bit, audience, that I'll be hosting really the most significant week in the family office world that I've hosted since probably late 2019. It's been a while. It's going to be in Palm Beach, Florida. And Daniel, actually, for a good part of it, is going to be not only joining us and you can meet and interact with him, but really kind of be a part of my official kickoff. So it begins the week of the 24th in beautiful Palm Beach, and officially begins at 4 o'clock on Tuesday of that week, the 25th, where me and Daniel will effectively hit the stage and even be more blunt, because we're not being recorded and for aspects of the world here. It's more of a targeted audience to share certain stories. And even some things I'm going to be bringing up now, it's going to be very impactful. Now, yes, I have standards in what I'm doing. It's a family office program. I need to limit it to single family offices, and members of my organization, SFO Continuity, have absolutely first opportunities. About 80% of my members are already committed to the event. I have a couple of guests, but for the most part, at this stage, we're somewhat overbooked, a good problem. But if you are interested in meeting people like Daniel and immersing over days, and by the way, other incredible thought leaders in investing, in structuring, and critical thinking, then you want to go to angelorobles.com and join, because you want to assure that you're going to be able to be a participant and get favorable access in terms of what I'm doing. I've said it before in my other programs that 1 week alone, and I'll be there all week, that 1 week alone is easily going to be worth the price of admission and joining and becoming a member. So among the things we're going to talk about, Daniel, besides some of the things we mentioned, but being even more targeted and more juicy in terms of the storytelling, is kind of crisis management for the family in the family office. I give the example of what if and playing out a what if scenario. We could do multiple. Our principal goes down from COVID, from the bus they didn't see, and all the secrets are stored kind of within them, literally, from passwords to, well, many things that we'll discuss at the program. I give a story about the island of Manhattan, and it is an island. What happens? Bridges go down under some sort of attack. Are you prepared? Do you have water? uh, what's your plan immediately for communication? How safe are your children? What's your 24, 48, and 72-hour plan? So the big picture for you, Daniel, is what's among the biggest blind spots that family offices have when it comes to crisis preparedness?
Well, I think just as a whole, they're completely blind. And when I say I hate to be so broad stroke because there's
okay.
Great family offices out there. Crisis is a different type of state of being. Uncertainty leads to crisis. And when an individual doesn't know what to do, that's when they make bad decisions. A couple minutes ago, in your discussion about Palm Beach, you used the word access twice. Access, I believe, is the new commodity. I think it's the most valuable thing you have. And it's not access to information anymore. ChatGPT has information is everywhere at this point. The media is everywhere. But if you don't have access to solutions when, as you said, the bridge goes down, the water goes down, the power, whatever it might be. And we've seen natural disasters. We've seen what's happened in California, what happened in Asheville, North Carolina, people without water for weeks. Imagine that in New York. But imagine being first generation down in Jupiter, and you have 4 grandchildren. They're in different cities, different colleges, et cetera, living different lives. You have no comms. They don't know where to go. There are no safe houses. Yep. They don't have backup passports. We talked a few weeks ago about how I was approached by an individual from the intelligence community who is developing a program and wants me to be a part of it, in which it would allow for an external source to be able to track, not like with where you're at exactly. It's more of checking in. Hey, I'm going to be here for this spring break. This is where I'm staying, et cetera. God forbid something were to happen, you would go here. When you get there, there is this bag that has your money, a satellite phone, et cetera, whatever the family would want. And obviously that bag could have pretty much anything you need in it. So when it comes to family offices in crises like what you're talking about, I think we're probably all pretty unprepared, Angelo. I don't think that's a family office specific problem. When I talk about crisis and crisis management as it relates to family offices, it's the real thorny stuff. It's the police are at the house, dad put his hands on mom, kids saw it, What are we going to do? This is a problem. There's neighbors, there's optics. Maybe that individual has a board seat on a nonprofit that is specifically against domestic violence. It could be incredibly challenging for that family. And then again, there are the children. When you're dealing with a crisis, Angelo, the vast majority of people are reacting to symptoms. And we have to deal with symptoms. When we're in those worlds, we have to mitigate and potentially neutralize. But where not family offices go wrong, but where the individual investor, the wealth holder goes wrong, is they have this false sense of illusion that the crisis is gone because the symptoms have passed. But the crisis is still there, and it's underneath the surface, and it's running like a river, just waiting for the next major disruption, whatever that might be. So I think in that regard, I think a family office has more of an obligation and a duty to bring in individuals such as yourself to talk about factors like that. I think that what you're doing with bringing people together, and I know there is others doing it. I've been invited. You said in the very top of this call, I don't do this too often. And this is actually the first time I've publicly spoken about what I do for a living outside of very private, curated events, country clubs, people's homes, dinners, et cetera, where I'll come in and speak to a private audience and have a very detailed conversation about, kind of what's going on. I think we need more of what you're doing. I would encourage anyone that is remotely interested in what you're offering to sign up. Access to solutions is going to be what people need. It's the basis of my advisory. I'm not the best lawyer in the world. I'm not the best negotiator in the world. But I have developed a robust network throughout the world of top-tier experts in pretty much every problem that you can imagine. And so what our clients are able to do is make one call, and they're able to tell us what's going on. We already have an understanding of the dynamics of their family, and we can immediately execute on a solution. Too often in crisis, we confuse support, which is a critical part of healing and getting through something difficult, with solutions. Support without solution is like an idea without execution. It's pointless to some degree. Many of my clients go to therapists, et cetera. They'll sit there for an hour. First 45 minutes are kind of driving it, right? Because therapy is typically driven by the individual. There's intervention by the therapist, et cetera, to steer them where they need to go. Last 15 minutes or so is kind of best practices as they go through their week. But when you get back in the real world, just a few minutes after leaving that office and the dopamine runs off and you feel like, oh, I'm back in my real world again. Well, who do you call when you need that support? We know that men especially are some of the loneliest individuals in the country. 40 and up can't count on one hand how many friends they have. It's pretty sad. So now put yourself in a crisis, right? Put yourself in a situation that you never thought you'd be in. Have it deal with one of your children, your grandchildren, your spouse, and then ask yourself, are you thinking clearly? I think most of us would appreciate that when we look back on our lives, there are ways that we could have probably handled the situation a little bit better. And we didn't, because we were going to steer that ship. But when an individual knows there is access to information, access to solutions, that's where the real transformation comes from. And I'll leave you with this small story, but I think it's relevant because it deals with the geopolitical aspect of things and why family offices should be more engaged, and they should be more engaged with high-level leaders, and not just politicians, but agencies, and getting involved and understanding what's going on. I didn't personally work on this case, but I was told about this case by the State Department when I was in the Senate, where an individual who was worth over 100 million child ended up in a remote part of Africa on a missionary trip. The child was abducted, and it was a pretty bad situation. What was striking about the story was that the gentleman said that he had been in this guy's office a number of times, and his office was filled with pictures of, with presidents and congressmen and, people of power in the United States. And he asked him, why didn't you call one of them? And he said, I don't know any of those people. I paid for those photographs. I don't know who to call, right? So they're calling their wealth advisors. They're calling all these people. Eventually they found someone, and they ended up getting linked up with a international company that does extractions and things of that nature. But minutes matter in situations like that, in hours. And the State Department individual told me, he said, had it been 24 more hours, that they were advising the family it wasn't worth it to go back. The child that came back would not be the same child, and it just simply, it's over, type of a situation. So think about that. Your child's out there doing a mission trip. You're feeling great about it. You're putting on Facebook and Instagram, letting everyone know how great your child is and how virtuous your family is. And then your child gets kidnapped, and you have no one to call. You got $100 million. You don't know who to call. That's a problem.
It doesn't get worse from that example that you gave. At the end of the day, I can really speak from the grandparents' perspective. Nothing matters more than, quote unquote, even than their children, their grandchildren. Like, that really is most important, and benefiting them and having them be purpose driven, have intent, and hopefully have some involvement with the family legacy, business, capital, and take it through the rocky times that, in my perspective, we're going to be heading through within the next couple of years, for sure. And I think, strangely enough, they actually could be the answer. It reminds me of something as you were talking. It's probably overused and unfair to people in their current positions that could change, adapt, get better. But the old adage is you can't fix what's broken with effectively the people that got you there. And this goes back to the importance of people within the family, their capacity, their capability, their hopefully building towards anti-fragility, and the quality of your people. I always say, if you hire brilliantly, which is so hard to do, I get it, like, you almost can't go wrong. So, but this goes back to, if the role is to solve problems, sometimes we all get into problems. How do we put our ego aside and bring in those that can help solve the problem? And that appears to be a little bit of the angst, unless it's so dire, like what you described with the situation in Africa. How do we help people look past their ego and just care about solving the damn problem?
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the two things. You said something I want to touch on at some point, because I think it's interesting to talk about the grandparents, and I am absolutely seeing what you're talking about as it relates to the grandparents now really investing in that third generation. It's almost, they skipped a generation. They almost saw the errors of their mistake. It's like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. I'm not going to make that same mistake again. So they're heavily invested in them. Well, that's great. But remember, there's a parent in there that was the child of the grandparent, and there's, hey, where were you at for me? And you find this interesting dynamic where you'll find parents that are jealous or resentful of their own children because their parent is, basically spending more time. They have more resources and availability to be there. To your question about how do we help people drop their ego? If it's not an extreme situation, I believe that people need to surround themselves, or not surround themselves. I believe that every family needs to have one individual in their life. There needs to be someone whose entire objective is to advance the interests of the family. Relational dynamics and conflicts of interest prevent solutions. You can see it in a corporate setting where maybe a CEO is making X decision. The subordinates are not going to say anything because they don't want to get fired. Maybe they've seen what's happened when they speak up. And so I think that people have to understand that if you want to change, you have to be comfortable with difficult conversations. I don't believe in, having multiple people telling you something negative. But you need someone that you respect, that is not afraid to tell you, you are wrong. And if you make this decision, this is what is going to happen. It's very difficult for individuals to see past the symptoms in the immediate crisis, to look ahead and see what could come from this situation. Again, control is there, fear is there. There could be other factors as well. But I think it comes down to difficult conversations, which requires people to be brave, but also to have a business or a model that allows for that. So when an individual comes to work with us, for example, they will have been referred, or they will have been personally invited by myself through some interaction that I've had with them, wherever it might be. And then we will vet them and make sure that they're a good fit for us, that we can help them with the challenges that they have, and also that we're not advancing anything that we shouldn't be advancing. But we make our clients sign agreements that say, if you don't want the truth, we're not here. We're not the right people for you. These are difficult conversations. Show discretion, professionalism, empathy. We care, but we care enough to tell you the truth. And that's the part that's crazy in families. They won't tell people the truth because they're afraid they're going to lose their money, whatever it might be. And that fear is killing people, and quite literally, actually. The substance abuse space in and of itself is a really fascinating space. I connected with a young lady recently who has it's a concierge in-home substance abuse protocol. They recognize that CEOs, heads of families, et cetera, cannot pick up and go for 6 months. There are optics, there are business responsibilities, et cetera. And so they come to you and they do everything in-house. They provide all the support that you need, medical and otherwise, so that you can stay there. Not only does it protect your reputation, but it also creates a more comprehensive way for the individual to be successful. And the reason for that is because life is not in a vacuum. But if you're in a substance abuse in Beverly Hills or down in Boca, you're living in a fairy tale land. They're just telling you everything you want to hear. They're making you feel good, and you need that. You definitely need to be rebuilt and to not feel how you feel. However, they have to then go back to the real world. And then once they're in that real world, how do they operate? Under the same system, as you said, if it was broke, they're now back in a broken system.
No, that's fantastic. And I think it's a backhanded compliment, but one of my members texted a little while ago, Angelo, you seem a little more quiet and subdued. I had like the worst cold or flu I ever had. So true, I'm recovering. But he then throws in, I like this new, less bombastic Angelo. Like, maybe I am going to be mellowing a little bit with age, everyone. Don't bet on it. This grandpa could still get things done, but like, I don't know. Like, we'll see. I love what you said. And, I actually thought a little bit about just being honest with my audience. I've been so fortunate knowing incredible people. And by the way, a lot of them, like how Daniel has felt in the past, they just have no interest in coming on. Like Angelo, enough powerful people know about me, legal, whatever it may be. I get referrals. I'm good. And sometimes I'm selfish. There's people I know that are incredible where I don't know if I want to share them with the world. I say them as part of my internal dream team for some of the work that I do with families. But I'm very happy I overcame that reluctance with Daniel and had a chance to share him with many of you and so many incredible insights. And we're not done yet. Got a couple of questions left. Sure. But I did want to, again, I hope you're all having a chance to enjoy this. It's probably a little different than what some of you are used to. And these are the things that are very, very important. I think a great question from at least my mind that I've been looking to ask you, you've seen families implode over power struggles. What is among the most common trigger points for a disaster?
Death, inheritance battles is going to be, I would say, the number one. If we're talking about, everyone's living and we haven't gotten there yet, I would say it's going to be based on the child's upbringing. Different resentments. There was a special child, maybe the older sibling was the star child and you just couldn't compete. You see a lot of issues as it relates to businesses. So the heir apparent is kind of the automatic lineage there to take over the company, and maybe the younger sibling or siblings have a problem with that. And they don't think, we've seen the show Succession, and
It's great.
It's a crazy show, right? But those shows are created and, of course, glamorized and sensationalized for TV. But a lot of what happens there is true in very real ways. So outside of death, I would say it's going to come back to childhood wounds. I don't have a client that, I shouldn't say that, I don't have a client, but most of the people I work with have some kind of childhood wound. And it's not, these are not the wounds that we think of with children that, go beyond the pale, but, just never being seen, never being heard, not feeling as though they could go on and pursue the things that they wanted to pursue. And that compounded becomes a force multiplier at a crisis point or at a chaotic point. And eventually people just get tired of it and they're just going to put their foot down and they're going to do something and make a bad decision or, try to sue the will or whatever they might do. And at that point, everything is going to fall apart pretty quickly. I can tell you that the things that happen in succession, most families would never recover from.
That is most definitely true. And by the way, you're getting some of my real curveballs. I'm not so sure if I was placed on the spot. And by the way, no prep. It's not like I really hate normally to give questions or those that pop in my head anyway, but in advance, because I want the conversation to be natural with a participant. Like, I'm not so sure that I really have great answers to some of these questions. What's the modern equivalent? We mentioned earlier the fall of Rome, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. What's a modern equivalent that effectively could take down even decabillionaires? Besides, well, you probably mentioned about the best one there is, like a controlling person passes away, not enough plans, or the opposite, looks to control from the grave. Henceforth, lack of communication, lack of cohesive, immersive planning. But besides those, are there any other things external or internal to the family that are obvious to you?
Yeah, I think relationships are a big part of it. We build strong relationships with those that we work with. In the family office space, you're, helping people. Family office is a little bit different. The ultra high net worth are more about preserving their wealth than optimizing their wealth. They're more, at least in my experience, they're not looking for the big windfalls. I've had several opportunities where capital is needed for, say, secondary offering of shares, or a business was being sold, a property was available, all offline. And when you take that to the family office, they almost always say no, which is shocking to me. I don't really understand it, right? Because they have the deck, they can do all their own research, et cetera. We're simply just presenting the opportunity. It's a small part of what we do, but we definitely do it several times a year, in which we just get a great opportunity. So imagine the 19-year-old who has been studying crypto for years. He's been on the Reddit feeds. He knows exactly what's going on. And he knows about this one meme coin or whatever it might be. And he's not asking for an extraordinary amount of money, 100 grand, $1 million, whatever it might be for their family. And then they're told no. And then they watch all their friends hit 20x, 100x, whatever it might be, and exit. And they're over here complaining about their allowance every month, which is more than what most people make in a year. But that builds resentment. And so I think a lot of it comes down to they're not listening to what these the second generation really wants to get involved in. And so then when you go to the family office and they say no, and then you try to offline with your father, your grandfather, whoever it is, and then they defer to the professionals, that automatically creates resentment between those two people. And maybe not so much from the professional to the individual, but definitely the other way around. You're the reason why my father said no. I got a call this year from an individual who was being extorted in a pretty serious way with actual threats. We had to call a couple of people, and we're doing this all preliminary as part of our model. Is if you are a member and you know someone who is in need and they fit our criteria, there is an option for us to get involved on an ad hoc basis if that member will basically refer them and account for them, so to speak. And so we put together a plan for this person in good faith, and he took it to his trust. So this individual has no living family members. He has a trust full of people that he doesn't know very well. He has to make a request to them, and they sent him a letter back, which basically said, if it's not legal, if it's not real estate, and if it's not a capital investment, you have your team, you have your therapist, you have your lawyer, they can help you. And he's saying, they're not able to help me with this situation. That was unfortunately a person that we were unable to help under those circumstances. So fast forward that situation and just conceptualize what he thinks about that money, what he thinks about those people, and the crisis that he was in was overwhelming.
Wow. No, that's, real stories, you're so good at it, it really is where it's at, and very valuable. Audience, I hope you're really enjoying it. When I talk about practice management and some work that I do, boy, my life is really exciting. Peter Drucker-like practice management principles inside a single family office. That's what gets me excited, everyone. I know it sounds simple, but it would help if I could identify what are your biggest problems? What bottlenecks do you have to those problems? And what are we doing to address them? So what are you doing to solve the problem, assuming it's even properly identified? And rather bluntly, like, what the hell did you get done today? Now, I want to be very careful how I phrase this. I don't want to offend so many people, but I think we're all familiar now with Elon and Doge sending out the requests to government employees, effectively saying, well, like, what the hell did you get done? I think it was this week or 5 things. We could argue a little bit out of left field, a little heavy-handed. I'm going to look at it as being someone who's worked in Fortune 500 companies, has been an entrepreneur, should have been doing this all along. This comes down to objectives and key results. This comes down to what KPIs, key performance indicators, are being done about avoiding distractions and being focused on the work that I'm getting paid for that I should be doing. Okay, I'll get off my high horse now, Daniel. No. This comes down to, again, is it that hard? Actually, I guess it is. Identify the biggest problem. What are we going to do to solve it? And what the hell did I get done today to progress to that goal without getting distracted by things that I kind of want to get distracted by? It's bullshit. I don't like it.
Okay. What exactly is the question? I'm sorry.
It was an Angelo rant. Okay. But are you in, now I get it. It's probably a little bit more in my wheelhouse on practice management stuff in a family office, but are you an advocate of identifying problems? What's the real problem? And how do I put practice management solutions around OKRs, around KPIs, around avoiding distractions so I could start to remove the bottleneck to get the work done on what I need to get done?
Yep. No, it's a great question. And so it lines up with really the first thing that I'm going to be doing with an individual once I've understood their problem. And that may take a day, it may take a month for them to really explain what's going on. If there's any lawyers listening, or, clients don't typically tell you the truth the first time around. And so you have to look a little deeper into what's going on to make sure, for 2 reasons: to protect them, but also to protect yourself. Back when I was practicing more law earlier in my career, I practiced very little law at this point. one of the things you learn in law school is how to take information and to compartmentalize it. You're not learning the law. I mean, you do, right? But you always say you're learning to think like a lawyer, and how a lawyer thinks, or actually, or how a good lawyer should think, is that a client comes in and they identify X amount of problems, but they don't give that in a linear way. They don't say specifically, "This is my problem," just like that. They're going to talk for 30 minutes, an hour, for hours, whatever it is. And a lawyer is trained to be listening specifically for legal issues, right? I mean, that's what we're worried about when we're listening to people. I apply the same model when I'm working with individuals outside of the legal context. I let clients talk. I will ask them questions that will lead to answers that I'm really looking for without having to ask it directly, so that it can come from them, so I'm not leading them in any way. And the very first thing we're going to do is we are going to compartmentalize the issues, okay? The second thing we're going to do is we are going to prioritize those issues. We are going to put them on their respective burners. There's always going to be a burner or possibly two that is boiling with water, and we need to deal with those right away. And then we're going to put the other ones in the back, and we're not going to worry about them too much. I mean, they are on the periphery, and we are mindful of what is going on there, but they're not front and center right now. But the third thing we're going to do is we're going to execute. But we're going to execute, based on your goal. So one of the first things I would say would be, Angelo, what is your goal here? If I had a crystal ball, and in just rubbing this crystal ball, the problem goes away. What is it that you want, right? And sometimes people struggle with that. You would be surprised how many people will repeat the same problems. And I'll say, okay, I understand that, validate them, hear them. I understand it. But what is the solution that you want? Or what is more specifically, what is the outcome that you want? Once we've identified the outcome for an individual, then it becomes really easy for us, because we can put that at the top of a piece of paper, and we actually will do it with our clients and say, this is your goal, right? This is what you've told us. This is what your goal is, right? And so what that becomes is basically the top of the pyramid, and everything comes down from there. So as an individual is getting distracted, as you were saying, or other things are happening, the second that happens, you can ask yourself, is this going to get me to my goal, or does this need to be somewhere else? And pretty quickly, clients can identify, like, oh, this is almost a non-factor. I don't know why I'm thinking about it, because we're trying to go up here right now. So I think the very first thing you have to do is understand the issues. You need to compartmentalize them and prioritize them, and then understand the goal. Once you understand the goal, you can march in fashion. You can plan for it rigidly. You can be flexible with the execution, but you understand the goal. And we always let the clients determine the goal. It's not our life. It's, I go home. I'm not going to be there to live with the outcome of what your goal is. Some clients keep us on to advise them, but mostly we're coming in, solving a problem, providing solutions, and then we're there for impact assessment afterwards. How did it go? What do you need? How can we help you there? But if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing, or you don't know what your goal is, you're just walking blind. I used to joke around. There'd be these funny memes or funny pictures coming up on Instagram. It's like, if you're in a dark place, just take a step forward, stand up and take a step forward, just some kind of like general positive advice. I would say that is such nonsense advice. You take a step forward, you could be walking off a ledge. You could be walking into a window. You don't know what you're walking into. To tell someone just to get up and take a step forward is not good advice. They could be walking into further disaster. The second thing, Angelo, is that I think we have a tendency to believe that action is the answer to a problem. But action can be inaction as well. Not doing something sometimes is the best outcome. But if you're taking that approach, everyone needs to understand how serious this can be if they don't understand. If we take this silent approach, quiet approach, we're going to kind of build our case behind the scenes and build our project there. So to your question, I think it's really just about identifying the goal and then marching towards that goal. If the goal shifts, then you march towards that goal, but holding the client accountable, and saying, Angela, you told me you're getting distracted. We had this conversation in February. You recorded that. Do you need me to play that back to you? When did your goal shift? Because you haven't told me it shifted. If you want to shift it now, that's your prerogative. But I'm still operating on our original plan here. So keep me posted, right? I need to know what's going on so that I can move with you.
No, that makes a lot of sense. My experience is, yes, like you said, you set the goal, you identify problems, solutions, and strategies to get there. You will hit bottlenecks, getting them removed. Your biggest challenge is going to be focusing that you're productive every day and distractions of nonsensical things don't get in your way. I get it. Working in a family office, the family is going to give you nonsensical things that probably aren't quite in your wheelhouse that somehow you or the team has to do. You'll have to figure out a way to deal with that or be very direct to the principal. As I thought our goals were this, and that. We want to stay focused because that's going to move the needle most on providing the most value. Maybe we need to bring in a glorified executive assistant that does a little this, little of that could help to deal with some of these other things, project management, tracking progress around it. But I go back to your distractions are going to be the end of many of you to hit the top tier that you want to be, that I know you want to be in the single family office. It's very, very important. Daniel, I do want to leave some things still in the tank. So we have incredible things to talk about in Palm Beach, more publicly, privately, but also in some private things that we may do with families. But I suppose with my audience, they'll be remiss if I didn't bring up things like, I do talk about the new family office is kind of an intelligence agency. It's also a tech powerhouse. That's the one where they always expect me to bring up. And why don't I hold it to a high standard and a lead investment vehicle and team as well, kind of all in one. So either I say they're leading this transformation or getting left behind. Maybe that's a little too future forward. Maybe it's a little harsh. But again, I want family continuity, and I want the family office executives to thrive, to be impactful to what they do. And I feel so many of them are actually not that far off. They could do it.
Absolutely.
But how do you look at things like integrating intelligence? I call it an internal intelligence agency, coupled with effectively how tech is changing, the impact of AI. I think robotics in 20 years will be the biggest industry ever. So we have so much coming at us. The world is changing, like how I started in the conversation with you. How, as a family office executive or even the family member, how could I keep pace in today's world?
You will have to use your resources. You will have to invest in that. There's really no way around it unless you are going to do it yourself and you're going to take on these challenges and try to understand all the risk factors that are there for your family. I think that's incredibly difficult to do for any one person. Again, it's why we defer so often to our experts, because we can only do so much. There's only so many people we can help. There's only so many crises that we can be there for. Something I've been working on even the last year. One of the reasons why I even really went to LinkedIn, because I have been pretty much offline. Set a website a couple years ago, but other than that, it's I've just been quiet, doing my work. I think family offices need to recognize that they have blind spots. That's the first spot. Is the first step. We have some blind spots here. We got a great platform. We got a great family or multifamily, whatever it might be. We could do some great things here. We need to be bringing in philanthropic impact. We need to be bringing in all the different aspects that Next Gen is talking about. But we don't have to do it all ourselves. And we don't have to get in the way of the professionals that can do these things. If they could get out of the way and focus on what they do, and they do well, then everyone wins. Because AI and even robotics, I don't know a ton about it, not enough to speak about it with you. But robotics will never, at least in my mind, be able to sit with a family in a difficult moment. Robotics will not be able to walk with a father out of a morgue after he's identified his child. Human connection is what family offices are lacking. And if they invested in that heavily, I think that there would be an incredible transformation, not only economically, but geopolitically and even domestically.
Wow, very impactful. And again, things I had to leave on the cutting room floor. My Detroit paradox, where sometimes it's not always what you don't see that destroys you, it's what you see and fail to act on. I have a story about Detroit seeing the Japanese automakers in the 60s and how that correlates effectively to the family office world. I was going to bring up systemic risk, banking, the Bank of London, gold. Does Fort Knox really have the gold that we as a country feel that it has? Like, there's just so many things out there to feel that there's not risk to your wealth and legacy. I mean, I guess maybe you sleep better at night than I do, everyone, but like there's so many risk out there. Maybe I know too much. It's scary, yet we still have to have a plan and move forward in the face of all the challenges that we do have. Daniel, for those that would like to highly recommend they follow you, and for those that would like to reach out and learn more, how could they do so?
So we have I have my LinkedIn page, which is not heavily used, but I do.
I love it.
Yeah, I've made some good contacts on there. In fact, this year alone, I've met two individuals who we've had great conversations, and I'm super grateful for the introductions to them because they do exactly what I need. One is a Harvard MD, been working with high net worth individuals for a couple decades now, deals specifically with conflict, but brings that medical background that I don't have. I mean, I've learned everything in the trenches. I was very blessed to have not only a great home to grow up in, two loving parents, both with master's degree, a mother that devoted her life to us as children. I also had an extended family that just gave us a lot of example and how to live and how to maintain some sense of normalcy and in a chaotic world, right? And that's what we're talking about. I think that you and I and others, the world that I live in, crisis is almost every day, some version of a crisis. So naturally, I'm probably see it more than other people. But I do think people need to start really opening up their eyes. They need to get off their phones. They need to engage with their children and start rebuilding those human connections. I think that, since COVID, we've lost a lot of connections. Prior to COVID, we would have done this in person. COVID happened, and then all of a sudden, everything changed. Literally, everything changed. But how it changed for businesses, now we're doing everything virtual, and that's okay. Virtual is not quite the same as being in person. So to your question, people can find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Zamora. I don't know if there's like a tag or something like that. My website is Daniel-Zamora, ZAMORA.com. There's a contact box there where people can send in a request for us to review their situation. It does describe in a little bit more detail some of the capabilities that we have. Obviously not all of them that we have on there, but people reach out. I'm happy to talk to them. This stage of my career, it's more about trying to make an impact in people's lives and a larger impact than just isolated family by family. There's only so many families that you can help with. And so I've been encouraged to start speaking a little bit more about what I do, share what I do, so that others can have access to it and hopefully, utilize some of these skills or some of the things that I've learned and our team has learned to effectively manage their own crises, because that's what people need to be able to do.
Well, I have a couple of comments. One is I'm going to have a little bit of new information in a minute or two to give you context to the Palm Beach program, where you can also meet David. A little bit of something new that would involve I mean, Daniel, someone like Daniel, I'll call Family Office Mansion coming up in a second, but I want to just build upon something that Daniel said. And again, I've been in this community for a long time, and I do know incredible people. I've been so fortunate. I am so excited that I had a chance to meet Daniel, at least virtually, and connect. That's going to change in person in a couple of more weeks, and have a chance to learn from him and his incredible work and insight. He is absolutely the real deal. He's very much, and these are my words, not his. I watch too much Pulp Fiction, and I do love the character, the wolf. Daniel is about the closest thing that I've seen to someone who would be like the wolf in Pulp Fiction for a family office. I highly recommend you follow him. You DM him on LinkedIn if you so desire. You reach out to him via the website. And members of my organization, you know what you have to do. Just ask, and I'll make a favorable personal introduction, including, I hope, you're all going to be in Palm Beach, where you could just simply do that more in person. So Daniel gets like my highest recommendation to have an opportunity to reach out. If I'm giving out one of my secrets, then so be it. You now know it. He's incredible. So a little bit on that note, Daniel and some people that are incredible in the community, a John Messerday, a Jordy Vischer, a guest I had on last week, incredible first principles thinker on investing, Kevin Griffin, and others are going to be a part in person of what I'm doing the week of March 24th in Palm Beach. The real star, honestly, is going to be many of you that are real investors in single family offices as you share your stories. And sometimes you're going to be just flat out asked by me, what are your last 3 investments? Why did you make them? What's the biggest mistake you made in the family office? How did you correct it? What's the last incredible conversation you had with your child? There's so many different things where really the star is not a panel full of advisors. It's families themselves and the family office executives that we don't always have the right answers. We're not professionals on stage, but that opportunity to share in a learning environment selectively with thought leaders like Daniel and others and getting that feedback really from the bottom of my heart, it's going to be a special week. So if you're a family or family office executive, stop overthinking it. Go to angelorobles.com. You've been thinking about it a little bit, I hope, and go to membership and join and be a part of my SFO continuity to automatically, no matter how overbooked I am, you're invited and going to be a part of it and going to meet incredible people like him. And more importantly, incredible peers, coupled with, I don't know, some pretty good proprietary intelligence, connectivity, other peers and other programs throughout the year. But that 1 week alone is going to be worth it. And I love all of you that service the community. You can reach out to me anytime. I'm here to be a friend of yours. And there could be certain circumstances in some advisor master classes that I teach and other programs coming up in the future where who knows where it could go. So I don't want to bifurcate those that are dutifully of service in legal, accounting, and finance. Many of you are incredibly talented, and I would benefit and learn. Have a chance to reach out. Angelo at angelorobles.com. For the first time in somewhat of a public setting, there'll be more to come on it as I roll it out in Palm Beach and really officially roll it out first week in June. What I call Family Office Mansion. Oh, it's a little bit clickbaity of a title. You'll have to forgive me. That's a little bit of me sometimes. So imagine a dream team focused on only you and your family to solve your biggest problems and give you insight into incredible opportunities that could change the dynamic, including many of the things that we spoke about today. Imagine something where, no, it's not in your backyard because you're going to get distracted. My backyard, I might get distracted. New York City, we're all going to get distracted.
Sure.
No, I'm not saying you're all going to come to Wyoming, but that would make my life easier. But something like that. And imagine an immersion over a 5-day period focused on you, your rising generation, and if applicable, your executives in your family office. Imagine That rising generation is going to be the one that's going to understand the nuances of how the world is changing and how AI and technology are going to flip and change everything. Imagine them now being armed and being a proactive force of having the connectivity. Imagine people like Daniel and others joining us half a day, a day and a quarter. Yeah, sometimes Zoom, but most importantly in person. Now, is this going to be cheap? No. To get people like that that are incredibly talented to join and give you their best ideas and help work on your biggest problems and showcase opportunities, this is not for the faint of the heart. This is expensive, for lack of a better word. It's a deeply immersive experience, by far deeper than anything that anyone else is doing. It's not as narrowly defined as only governance or only investing. It really is more future forward in a lot of the work that I've been talking about for the last couple of months, and everything that I've been saying about how your life or your world revolves around, and the family office is built in a world that to some degree no longer exists. It is going to change, and it's going to change rapidly, and not all of it's going to be pretty. So that opportunity for you and your family, I think, is going to be very important. I don't, yes, I do have a private website that I'm working on now, so it's not for public release. I'll talk more about it in Palm Beach, and in the coming weeks to months, I'll more officially, probably on my angelorobles.com, have a chance to roll it out. And happy to get any feedback in terms of, as a family, what you're looking for from any sort of immersive experience, how I could learn and help provide value back to many of you. On that note, I appreciate all your time. I hope you're doing well. I hope you really enjoyed Daniel today. And some of you will meet him in a short couple of weeks. Daniel, you've been an incredible guest. I'm honored that basically I'm the first family office platform that you had a chance to showcase your amazing critical thinking and thoughts to. I'm all the better for it. I'm going to go and listen to it and take notes because, damn it, you're that good. I appreciate you very, very much. Thank you.
Well, Angela, I appreciate the platform. I appreciate the opportunity, but I think more importantly, I just appreciate what you're doing. There are a number of people doing what you're doing in terms of getting communities together. I've seen good ones. I've seen some that are not so good. The more that we have these conversations, the more that people understand that they don't have to suffer in silence. They don't have to suffer alone, that there are solutions. There are unconventional ways to solve problems. I think we'll be better as a society, as a nation, and more specifically as families. Families are the bedrock of this country. We have lost our sense of family. We have lost our sense of heritage, of legacy. And it's important that we have these difficult conversations so that we can continue to be a strong nation and move forward and really reclaim what we once were.
Daniel Zamora, everyone, thank you so much. Everyone, look forward to next time. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.